Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because, folks, life's too short to be miserable. Hello, inspiring possible people, and welcome back again. One day I might think of a different intro besides welcome back, but that's what I do every time you come back to the show. So if this is your first time, your fifth time, your 1,000th time, well, there's not 1,000 episodes, so maybe 40 something time to be back. Welcome back. It's really awesome that you are listening because you are the reason why we continue to take the time to invite incredible guests to come share their stories, their wisdoms, their insights, so that you could possibly either take a nugget away or rethink maybe what is possible for you in your life. And today we're going to talk about a topic that, no matter where you are and what you do and where you're serving in life, you may at some point be asked, voluntold, or choose to lead someone, something, somebody. And I know for me, as I've had different leadership opportunities, this has always been a point of each time that I feel like I arrive, I realize how far I still have to go and how much I still need to learn about myself, but also how to effectively be able to lead others. And so I am really excited about today's guest because not only is she an award winning author, leadership development coach, corporate trainer, and speaker, she also brings more than 25 years of experience in leadership, management, corporate training, and organizational development. And so much so, she's actually even wrote a book about it called Walking the Leadership Ledge, The New Leader's Guide to Building Resilience and Confidence at Every Step. So if you've ever led before or are aspiring to lead, I hope you keep listening because I know Tess Fyalka is going to give us some really good insights today. So welcome to the show, Tess.
Christy, thank you. I'm so excited to be here and talk all things leadership with you.
Yay. Well, let me ask you this. How did leadership become your thing? Like, where did that start and how did it develop to you being what you do now in helping inspire leaders and help coaching them along the way?
Yes. Well, probably like virtually everyone, I found myself in a leadership position and I was completely and totally in over my head. And, I was pretty young at the time. I was in my early 30s, I believe it was. And, it was just like, oh, what do I do with this? And I think unfortunately we have so many bad examples of leadership that, it's like, and I didn't want to be one of those bad examples, but still I it wasn't, I mean, it's like so many others, I was finding my way in the dark and, knocking my shins on the furniture along the way. And it was a painful and important and powerful journey. And so that was kind of like the early, like so many, found myself in leadership. And then I over time I began to get my footing a little more, but I still didn't necessarily know what I was doing. And I ended up actually, my first career was in marketing and public relations, and I never really liked it, to be honest with you. And I never feel like I don't feel like I was ever really very good at it. But it was just kind of like what I did. And I went out on my own and went into business for myself. And during the time that I was in business for myself, I actually moved out of marketing and public relations and I moved into training and leadership development. And that was kind of through serendipity. I wound up connecting with a management consulting company and I worked for them for 13 years. And it was in that place where it was like the choirs of angels began singing. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. And the I just fell in love with all things leadership development and management and how you can, as a leader, truly set the course for the kind of organization that you want to create that's possible when you've got some tools to do that. Because again, when we don't know what we don't know, first of all, that's a big issue, but also, as we were kind of talking a little bit, before the show, it's like I there's so much fear attached to the aspects of leadership that folks see they're uncomfortable, they're challenging, the difficult conversations, the setting expectations, all of that stuff. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty around that. And I believe that fuels this sort of like causing the concept of leadership to be harder than it is. It's like because I for one, I can tell you, I certainly make things harder than they need to be. I just asked my
Oh, I'm the
husband. Oh,
queen of
gosh.
overcomplicating anything, Tess, okay, 100%. I'm like, if that's gonna be simple, I'm gonna make it 10 times more complicated, and then I might back my way back down to simple, but it's gonna get more complicated before it gets simple.
Oh yeah, same. Okay. Yes,
Mhm.
same. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting about how we all kind of get into paths of leadership or things that we're passionate about, which I know you're passionate about helping leaders. And it's always interesting to see how the path does take us. And it's what I took from your story is sometimes it starts off with leading or either having pain through leadership or having not great leaders that then push you into a place that you're like, "Oh, wow, now that I'm supposed to do this, I definitely don't wanna be like that, but I really don't know how to be like this aspiring person that I might see over here seem to lead with no problems." And then what I'm curious from you about too is I feel like for a lot of leaders I talk to, the internal stuff that goes on sometimes associated with the pressure of leading, can really put people in a tailspin of a place where they can't really always effectively lead because they're either second guessing themselves or they may have really good intentions and want to lead well, but at the same time too, they're worried about having hard conversations and disappointing people. So I'm curious, what do you see as the biggest challenge that today's leaders seem to face with all the people that you've worked with?
The biggest challenge, that's a tough one because there are frankly a lot of challenges. But
Okay.
let's kind of let's sort of peel the layers of the onion here. First of all, to your point, the leadership is an inside out job. And oftentimes, early in the leadership journey, you don't realize that. I mean, because you're
Mhm.
focused on how do I get stuff done? How do I get people to do what they need to be doing? Why don't they just get it? How do I have the difficult conversations? How do I set the expectations? And the early in our leadership journey, in our adult life journey, we're focused on we're measuring our success by what do we think other people think about us. And so we're so worried about that we're not paying much attention to, what are my own values? What's most important here? And how can I get grounded in my values so that I'm leading from a place that is values grounded? And if we explore our values, they're usually multidimensional. Like I may have a value of kindness and also hold a value of courage. And so I may find that early in my leadership journey, maybe I'm leaning too much into the value of kindness, and I'm actually confusing that with being nice because I'm trying to be a nice person and I'm not having the tough conversations or setting the expectations or calling out behaviors that are unacceptable, so on and so forth. And as I develop in my leadership journey, I start to recognize, if I'm fortunate and I have some trusted truth tellers around me, then I start to recognize that, I've been leaning so much into kindness at the expense of courage. And it's in courage where I can step forward and I can become more fully the leader that I'm capable of being.
Yeah, well, I can think about this and even our team, we've recently, because we were talking about before we pushed the button that, I do, I am blessed to have the role of leadership. And, one of the things with my leadership team that we really started talking about maybe towards the end of last year, because we're still, I feel like, newer in our team journey. We're about 7 years and 6 years with a team. And one of the things we've went through very many iterations as we've went along the path of our growth journey and the impact journey we've been on. And one of the challenges that we found, because we are a group of helpers, okay, I'm in the mental
Yes.
health therapy
Yeah.
realm, group of
Mhm.
helpers, the challenge that we'd find ourselves up against a lot of times when leading was that we would lean into that kindness, that compassion, that understanding, the understanding of where maybe somebody is coming from or what they're dealing with or why they may be reacting to that or all these things. But the challenge became that sometimes what we would do as helpers is rescue versus empower, or we wouldn't necessarily. So I'm seeing what you're talking about. Have the courage to have some of those challenging conversations and how to be honest and deliver feedback effectively and then hold accountability of some of the things that
Yes.
really needed to happen so that the organization could move towards the vision and the mission that it had and complete the mission that it had. And so what I'm hearing you say, kind of as you're kind of discussing and peeling back the layers, that it can be multifaceted, but really maybe a good place to start is understanding your values and how that sometimes those values can actually compete against each other in some ways. But how do you lean into them in a way that could actually still meet the goals of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve as a team?
Yes, yeah, and, again, so many important things that you hit on there in terms of all right, so when we're part of a team, when we're part of an organization, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? I mean, we are there in service to the organization and the mission and the vision, and how are we together moving toward that? And the organization in providing for us in the appropriate ways, then we benefit from being a part of that organization. So it's not just it's not an either or proposition. It's a both and proposition in that we are here together in service to the mission, and the organization is here to help us succeed in fulfilling that mission and succeed in becoming more effective people and human beings. So I just lost my train of thought where I was going with that, but the recognition of our why we are here, and also the other thing when and especially when, in an organization of helpers who struggle to have those difficult conversations, oftentimes what I find is that they I talk about it in my book, and that they tell themselves the big lie, and that my only concern is for others and their happiness and their well-being, when in actuality, if we're being truly honest and we're really taking a good hard look in the mirror, the reason we're doing that is because we're trying to protect ourselves from the discomfort and the dis
Discomfort.
Yes, exactly,
Mhm.
yes, and part of that, again, that goes back to fear, in that we imagine that if we have that accountability conversation, if we set those clear expectations, "Oh, the other person is gonna react in such a way," and so we tell ourselves these simple stories around how the other person might react, and in actuality, in so many cases, Christy, the other person wants to know because,
100%. Yes, this is what
yes,
I've
yes,
found as the more I learn along this journey. And it's actually a kindness to be able to be honest, because I don't know
yes,
about you, but what I've learned as we've leaned into what you're talking about a little bit more and having these more direct conversations, and not honestly that we've had really recently, we really haven't had a lot of issues where we've had to really address them. But when we have had those issues, it's what I've found is that most people, if they are aligned with the values, the mission, and vision of your organization, then they actually want to show up and do a good job. And a lot of times they may not understand how their behaviors may be impacting the people around them or the organization. from reaching the ultimate goal that we're trying to do, whether it be for us, it's inspiring hope for change to, help people move forward and live fully. That's a great, in my mind, mission. Who wouldn't want to be a
Oh,
part
yeah.
of that? But at the same time, too, sometimes we don't always realize that our behaviors may be limiting some of those specific outcomes that we're trying to obtain, or the service that we're trying to provide, or whatever. And those honest conversations to say, well, what is your perception about this? Here's what I'm seeing. How can we find a way to reach this ultimate goal? It could be tools that they need to have that they've never been taught before. It could be awareness that they might not even realize that this is something that they're not doing or missing. But to your point, it is really interesting because I love how you said it's the big lie, because we're like, oh, we don't want to upset anybody. We want to upset the apple cart. When in the end, it is so true. If I've ever avoided a conversation, it's because I don't want to go through the discomfort 1,000% of like, maybe it'll just go away. Maybe this won't be a problem. But what happens, Tess, when we don't confront stuff?
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
what happens?
Oh, yes, it just grows exponentially.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
and then, I mean, the really unfortunate thing is that it's like we shove it away and we shove it away and we shove it away, and then there's some small incident, or situation that we just lose it. I mean, and then we just blow, and then we have reacted completely in a way that is totally out of proportion with the situation, because it's all this stuff that we've been stuffing for so long and not addressing. And it's like, if we can on our teams, and I want to come back to alignment because that's so important. But if we can create on our teams a culture of conversation where we're just routinely checking in, and we're talking about stuff, and how did you feel about that conversation and how things went the other day, and what do you need from me that you're not getting from me, and this is what I need from you, and these are some things that you can do to support what we're trying to do over here. What do you need from me to be more effective? But where we can create a culture of conversation, and where then you're not in this situation where, oh my God, I've got to have this difficult conversation that has grown out of proportion to what the initial situation was when it was first an irritant. Like, I talk about in the book, I talk about, Ian, and Ian he's new to the team, and he's so excited to be a part of the team, and he's talking over everybody, in the team meetings, and people are getting annoyed, and they're shutting down, and they're pulling back, and Ian, to your point, he's thinking that, oh, he's contributing, and he's showing his enthusiasm in that. And so the lens through which he's seeing his behavior and the lens through which others are experiencing it, there's the big disconnect, right, between intention and impact. And so, but
Mhm.
Ian wants that. He wants to be a valued and contributing member of the team. And it's actually, and I know this probably sounds a bit dramatic, but I really consider it to be cruel when a leader does not articulate or help a team member grow. When a leader is watching a team member trip over the same rocks over and over again, and they're not coaching them as to what the residual impact is of that behavior. It really does set them up for failure. And how unfair is that? And how cruel is that?
Yeah. Well, and to that point, we were talking recently. I'm lucky to be a part of, I guess, a cohort or collaborative of leaders that are in very similar roles as me. And, it really does get unfortunate when we get so frustrated, we can't help somebody develop into the person that they want to be, or the member within the organization that they want to become, because we have not had these conversations, or we've gotten frustrated too fast to be able to address the behavior in a very calm and, like you said, the culture of conversation, a feedback way that allows for that growth to occur. Because I do think there can be times where it can be a great member that we just perceived in a certain way that limited us from really truly helping that person, especially, and I know you're about to get to alignment, if they're aligned with what you're trying to do. Um, I was reading this article. I don't know. I read emails sometimes and articles from different things of
Mhm.
leadership and entrepreneurship and all the things, just as I'm constantly learning. And somebody was telling a story about a person in their organization that they just thought was the worst team member. They weren't meeting their goals, they weren't hitting their outcomes, they were just low performing. And so she had automatically went to the thought that this was the worst hire I have ever made because this person's constantly not hitting what they're supposed to be doing each month. Well, it was interesting because she goes on to tell the story that so she starts with curiosity, asking questions to figure out what may be going on. But her first reaction that she really wanted to do was just like, let's get rid of this team member. Let's keep on moving, you know? But she started having conversations. Well, she finds out from this team member who she perceived was underperforming that actually the reason why they weren't hitting their outcomes was because they were helping all these other team members and were doing roles and responsibilities that were actually out of their scope under the guise of being helpful, while the other members are actually achieving all their goals. Why? Because they had this person's help. But this
Wow.
person then is neglecting their stuff. And so she said it was a real big learning moment for me to how to be curious in some of these situations because I would have just wrote it off as this person, underperforming, or like Ian. Ian's being too, zealous, and he's, oh Lord, we're gonna have a problem with Ian. Ian's gonna, steamroll every meeting and we're never gonna get through anything. But really, Ian just is excited and needs to just have maybe some feedback or some redirection of how we normally run meetings. That we still want his excitement, but we need a turn take. And, here's how to give feedback. And here's our
Mhm.
culture of what we expect when you bring stuff to the table. But it's not because Ian's trying to do bad. He wants to do good. He's just, yeah.
Exactly, exactly, and, it goes back to what story am I telling myself?
Yeah.
And how might I be wrong? What's another story? It's kinda like, and thankfully, as, that leader's example was, that they went in with curiosity, and curiosity is queen, king, and everything in between. I mean, it's just like when you as a leader can approach a situation, from the stance of true, genuine curiosity, um, then that is so powerful. And the other piece of that is this. Another trap that leaders fall into, that especially newer leaders, is this: they feel this pressure to know everything, to have all the
Mm,
answers. And
yeah.
and even though intellectually they know that they can't possibly, it's such an ego shift for them, and it's such a vulnerability shift for them to be able to acknowledge that they don't know, and I talk about this in the book. Your three best friends are the words "I don't know," because that's reality, and you'll find out. Sure, you'll find out, but giving yourself the grace and the permission to acknowledge that I don't know,
Yeah.
I haven't run into this before. I'm new to the role. I'm still learning myself, and that's okay, and people respect that. But when we're in that situation, we feel so much pressure to have all the answers, and we can't
Yeah.
possibly do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're making me think of a lot of conversations I've had recently, Tess, where there is one of the programs that is in transition within our organization. And I had to say, they were asking me questions and I was like, listen, I have no idea how this is going to go. But I will commit to being forthright in my communication. And as things unfold, or as I learn new information, or whatever the case, that I will communicate that to you. However, we don't know. There's so many variables here that we don't know how this is going to go. It's very uncertain. And I could tell you, yes, I know that this is going to happen in this amount of time, and this is going to be the outcome, and this is where we'll land. But you just can't. And I do think it takes a minute. I'm still getting comfortable with um being okay with not having the answers, because for a long time, definitely whenever I was younger, I felt that pressure of, like,
Mhm.
I need to know they've put me in this role, so I'm supposed to know,
Right. Right,
you know?
exactly. I'm supposed to magically, through osmosis, because I now have this title, just simply know all of the answers. And that's such a trap. And then we say things, or we give answers that then, later on we've got to come back, with our head in our hand, going, "Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, I really didn't have the answer and spoke too soon." Or we make a commitment
yeah,
to a client and it's like, "Uh-oh, this is, a bigger
yeah,
problem, more
and I don't know
costly
about you,
program."
Tess, but I don't like that. I have a real struggle with
Mhm.
falling on the sword. I'm not gonna say that I
Oh,
won't have
yeah.
to do it if I have to, but I'd rather not.
Yeah, for sure. That's how normal is that? How human
Yeah,
is that? Yeah. I mean, well,
yeah,
and our brains crave certainty, so
mhm,
uncertainty is so uncomfortable for us. And so,
mhm,
yeah, I mean, again, just very it's just very human. The struggles that leaders face are very human, very normal struggles. And if they can recognize that, this is part of this is normal and it's okay, and as I develop the tools and develop the skills and the competencies to become more effective, then I'll have fewer of those moments. But giving ourselves the grace to acknowledge that, I don't know, but I'm learning, and
yeah.
leaning into that.
What do you think are tools, would you say, maybe if you could pick top 3, or you might have more than
Mhm,
this, that effective leaders really need to cultivate and have, to be able to be the leaders that people wanna follow?
Number one is curiosity. And so, that seeking that, as we've all heard, over thousands of years, seek first to understand. And that is, rather than jumping to conclusions, that would be number one. Because when you can tap into the collective intelligence of the very smart people who are surrounding you, I mean, that scales your capacity, and that is powerful. And the other thing in that space is that they are then invested in what you are together creating as part of this bigger vision, this bigger mission. I would say number two is probably, and it's so often overlooked, is setting the clear expectations. And over and over again, I will talk with leaders and managers, and they're like, well, you know they should just know. They should just know, what good customer service is. And, this is another example from the book, from Joseph, and he ran a franchise, and he was hiring team members. His organization, his business was growing, and he was hiring team members, and he was so frustrated with his team members because he didn't like the way they were working with the customers. And, as we talked, so tell me, about your onboarding process and how do you set expectations, and when you're having conversations with them about what really good customer service looks like, tell me about how you frame that. And poor Joseph was like, "Oh, I don't want to have those conversations." And shouldn't they? I mean, isn't it obvious what good customer service is? But it's like things that are so clear to us. Like for Joseph, it was utterly and completely obvious. But his team members, he had to set forth, what does good customer service look like? What are the top 5 things that the person walks in the door? How do you greet them? What's the way you introduce them to the product, or inquire about what they're looking for today? Whatever it is, setting forth that, what does good look like? Because in our mind, it's abundantly clear. And then we're frustrated when the other person isn't delivering on what we think is abundantly clear. And I think the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that if you can create a culture of conversation, then so many of these other issues get addressed. Like that's where, I mean, because feedback is just part of regular dialogue, and accountability is just part of regular dialogue. It's not like, oh, I've got to go hold this person accountable, and it's like, oh, that sounds so so big and hairy and uncomfortable and all of that. We've got an accountability problem here. Well, have we had a conversation where we have talked about what's expected, what good luck looks like, and are we having regular dialogue around how things are going? And what do you need as a leader to feel like, okay, I have a sense of where things are on this particular project? So we've set up a cadence for when we're going to check in on the status of things. It's not a matter of, I'm assuming that when I said, hey, can you go take this project? And, Betsy on my team said, sure, I'll do it. And then Betsy brings it back and it's not what I expected, or it's not by, the date that I expected because I said, get it to me as soon as possible. And in my mind, that was by the end of the week. And in Betsy's mind, that was like when I get to it. And then, when she brings it back, it's nothing like what I want because I haven't talked about what good looks like. So I've thrown a lot at you. So let me let you ask a question or
No,
clarify anything that I've thrown out
I'm
there.
just, again, as we're having this conversation, what happens to me of any of this when we're talking about, it just draws back to mind conversations that I've even literally had in this week. But I think it's because that culture of conversation, we'll have to say, I will give ourselves some credit over here. We've worked on trying to do better at that. Now, I will say the risk of a leader is that when you invite this culture of conversation, there's some things that you may not want to hear and you got to get comfortable with receiving. You know what I'm saying? Because again, you're asked if you're wanting to be able to give feedback, you've got to be able to receive it. But we were even the looking at this week a little bit more clarity around some policies that we have that we people had questions about. And so old me would have been like, well, why is there a question about it? It says it right there. But now that I've looked at it, the longer we've gone on with a different lens, and I'm like, man, yeah, that's very vague. And as we've received feedback, or like, it really doesn't help people really know what's correct and what's not. And so then it's inviting that collective feedback about what are we missing? How can we look at it this way? Is there a way to clarify? So listen, this policy test that was about 2 paragraphs is about to be a half a page. Does that make sense? Because again, we've learned that people just want to know what to expect so that they can adhere to whatever that policy is. And not that we can always just outline everything in black and white. There's so many areas of gray in any type of organization, or if you're a leader, there's things that will hit you that have never been discussed before and you're like, never thought about that one.
Right.
But
Hmm.
having that curiosity, and then I love how you said also, again, setting that expectation of what good and great looks like. I put good and then I put great. So what's good? And then actually what's the expectation of great? And then how do you create that conversation to continuously reiterate what that looks like? Because people, unless you tell them, they don't know. Like, I don't know about you, but I can think about what one of the things we've dived into a lot lately is like work experience and even like some of the stuff we bring into a new workplace where we might not have had some great experiences in a previous workplace. Workplace trauma is a real thing, folks. At least is what I've learned. And sometimes you might have reactions from people that you don't even really understand where that's coming from. And it could have been from a previous work experience where there was a certain way where this conversation happened and it could have been one sided, not two sided. But I'm constantly learning about, okay, well, how do we define what this looks like here? Because what looked like somewhere else is not what necessarily how we do things here. And if less I've trained on that or giving them that clarity, they have no idea that that's the way that things are done because maybe what was good somewhere else is not what good looks like here. And so I guess it's hard to sometimes bridge that gap, but one of the things you were alluding to earlier was onboarding. And so what do you think are the things that really need to be in an onboarding training from before the person even hits your team? And this could even be in a community volunteer situation,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
What do you think is there any essentials that you think needs to be in an onboarding or initial engagement with people before they assimilate into your team?
Yeah, well, in fact, that's like all of chapter 3 in my book. Yeah. Yeah, throw them a floaty so you don't drown, but that it really it's in there, it really is it starts before they ever join your team, and where like 2 weeks out, you're sending them an email, so excited you're gonna be joining the team, just here's a reiteration of the mission, vision, and values. We can't wait, to have you a part of helping to make this, bring this to fruition. And for your first day, these are the things to expect, and just outlining that. It's not, you know, it's not a voluminous email, but outlining what to expect the first day. And then hopefully you have created a training plan for them. And the training plan, it's gonna cover, like, depending on the position, it might be anywhere from, 4 weeks to 12 months, depending on the level of the position, where initially, you're doing things like, yeah, the stuff that you would do, as part of orientation. But orientation and onboarding are very different things. But the with with the onboarding, you have outlined, like, specifically who do they need to meet with in the organization? Who are some of the subject matter experts that can train them on, like, how do you use the computer system? How do you file this report? How do you complete this particular invoice? These things that are essential to setting them up for success, where we're not just throwing them in there and saying, "Hey, good luck. Let me know if you've got any questions." But we're really being intentional about what are the core things that the person needs to know and be able to execute. It's like what do they need to be familiar with? What do they need to be proficient at, and what do they need to be truly exceptional at? It's like thinking about it in those tiers, so that there. And again, it's not going to be everything, but if we sit in the position, of what's the role that person needs to fulfill, and how can we best set them up for success, where we're integrating them into the organization, both the tasks and the culture, and things like, who are the key stakeholders, and encouraging them to go and interview the key stakeholders about, what do you hope for this position, and what would be some of the things that would be most important for me to know, that I can be successful in the organization. And so, just, a variety of, but really thinking about, okay, where do they need to be in, from the start date, the first, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, in their particular journey. What do you really need from them? And hitting on those core things, and making sure that there is a pathway to proficiency, I like to say, where we're setting them up for success. And we're not, 3 months later going, "Oh my God, this is the worst hire ever."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the other thing, you made an important point about, the workplace trauma, and we all bring those past cultures. And so, and the baggage of those past cultures, and what was, like, if we think about Ian, well, maybe in his past organization, it was very lots of extroverts, and everybody was just, chiming in and talking over each other and all of that stuff. And now he's in an organization where perhaps there are more introverts around the table. But he's bringing that past culture with him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting to think about and even have, again, conversations around, because we most of the time we don't get somebody that starts at zero, never had a job, except for maybe I think about my teenage daughter who has her first job that she's been working at right now for a little while. But there's still some things that I see with her that I'm like, oh, yeah, I think you showed up a little bit late. But then I have to not do the thing of like, well, I don't know if her boss told her that's an acceptable thing. To me, you should have showed up right on before, like 10 minutes before, not waiting 5 minutes after. But again, she's learning behaviors. I don't
That's
know. I think there's going to be some good behavior she's going to learn from there. But there might be some
right.
things that she gets into the next workplace, whereas they might have not had that expectation for her to be there right on the dot or before. That if she gets into the next role and they have that different expectation, it may not go so well, you know?
Right.
She may
Exactly.
learn fast depending on how much feedback they give her on certain things. And so it is always interesting to see where people are. But then what I'm hearing you say is the most important part. And I think this is something that is been challenging even for me to learn is like have a plan of what even good looks like, not only from like a client care perspective or customer service perspective or whatever it is in their role, but where do I expect them to be? And I can't have the expectation for somebody that has been with me 6 weeks to be at some place where somebody should be in 6 months. But I love how you said map that out, like, what is good at this phase? What is good at this phase? What am I not expecting from them until they've been, long enough to really, integrate into what we're doing? At that point, they can be on their own devices with just some minimal check-in and oversight because I feel that they should have at this point reached this level of competency. But anyways, you're giving me some things to think about that I may end up
Yeah.
integrating. And
Yeah.
even if you're
Mhm.
listening as a leader, it's all these things you kind of almost have to sometimes not do well at so that then you can learn, hmm, maybe that didn't go so well. Maybe just throwing somebody in there and expecting them just to figure it all out, which I did in the past. I ain't gonna lie, Tess. There would be sometimes
Oh,
like,
sure.
here's the basic training. Okay, go forth and prosper. And then
Yeah.
when they came back and they were like, I have all these questions, and I'm like, well, why? You know?
Right.
Because
Right.
wait, oh,
Uh-huh.
you like, we didn't write it down anywhere, or it's not a place for you to reference, or maybe I had this expectation of you that was so not realistic, because you need to learn and grow just like we are. It's
Yeah.
always interesting when you're in those situations, but okay, well,
Exactly.
I know we could probably keep on
Yes. Oh
going,
my gosh.
Tess,
Oh,
but
yeah. I
time
can't believe how
flies when
fast
you're
this
having
went.
fun.
Okay. Yes.
But
Mhm.
if people are like, I need this book, or I might even need some one on one help myself because, either I've been doing this leadership for a long time and maybe I'm realizing just from this conversation, I may need to change some things, or I'm a new leader and I just feel a lot of pressure and all those things you're talking about. I'm there and I need a copy of this book. Where can people either get the book or connect with you to learn more?
Yes. So the book is on Amazon and it's in print, Kindle, and Audible. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can, yeah, yeah, actually, you can find my email address on LinkedIn and you can send me an email directly. And I am looking at the fall to have a cohort of women leaders, the Soul and Science of Leadership for Women. And so if you're interested in that, please reach out to me and let me know that you're interested. And yes, LinkedIn is my only social media, so there I just don't have time for all the other stuff. Mhm.
Tess, good for you, okay?
Yes,
Because I'll be
yes.
honest with you, there's some days and I don't do it as much, I used to be more, but some days I'm like, if I disappeared from this social media world, what would life look like?"
Oh my gosh, yes. So
Yeah,
2 other things, just real
okay,
quickly, my website is anglecoaching.com. That's ANGLE coaching.com, and then also my book website is walkingtheleadershipledge.com. So those are a couple other ways you can connect with me, so
okay.
this has been such fun, Christy.
Yeah,
Yes.
it has been, and we'll make sure we'll link all that stuff up in the show notes, so if you are looking for those links, you can be able to find them there. But Tess, I do have a final question for you, and that is if you were to go back to younger leader you, maybe in that first leadership role that you found yourself in that you said was kind of painful, and you were to give yourself a word of encouragement or one thing that you'd really wanna impart to young leader you, what is something that you wish you could go back and impart to young test leader, young
Choose to
leader
be
test.
vulnerable. Choose to be vulnerable, let the armor down.
Mhm. Why do you think that's so hard for
Because
vulnerability?
we're yeah, because we're afraid and we're so insecure. I mean, it's protection, right? Because we know that in most cases we know we're in over our heads. And the thing is, but we don't want everybody else to know. But the fact of the matter is, everybody else can see it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
So the more we're honest about it, the more help we can actually get, and I
Yeah.
think, leaning into what you said earlier about the collective, I think that's sometimes we forget that there's brilliant minds all around us that have different perspectives and we don't have to carry it all. But it's so hard to relinquish that shield of defense and to really let that down and welcome that collaboration in the process. So well, Tess, I appreciate you so much. I just want to acknowledge you for coming on, taking the time to come on the show today. Also, share your wise wisdom. I wrote a few things down that I'm like, oh, yeah, we really need to implement that. So I'm definitely going to be taking some of these things into my own leadership journey. And I really appreciate anybody who's willing to help any leader anywhere learn how to lead more courageously, but also lead more confidently because I think, we need leaders that really can step into those roles and really be able to develop culture of conversation and connection and collaboration. Because I really think that that's where the workplaces, at least in my mind, have seen, or even the community organizations that need leaders. We really need those types of individuals to help lead with those things that you said. And so, for listeners, listen, I'm going to recap what Tess said just so that you can remember it as you go along in your day. And maybe you have to lead somebody somewhere around something. So, three things she said that I'm really taking from it is number one, seek first to understand versus being understood, something I still work on every day, but remaining curious. Setting expectations and defining what things look like, great looks like for your organization, what good looks like for your team, or even for your community that you're leading. And then number three, create a culture of conversation. I think sometimes we're just one good conversation away from learning something that we don't know that will help us create whatever thing that we're trying to go towards. So have a conversation today. Until next time.
That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.